Stop everything you're doing right now and listen closely, because what I'm about to reveal will completely shift the way you've been interpreting your entire life. You weren't paranoid. You weren't overreacting. You weren't imagining patterns that didn't exist. Every time they tried to gaslight you into doubting your own intuition, every time they labeled you as dramatic, hypersensitive, or delusional, you were right. You sensed something real, and now it's time to confront the truth head-on. The evidence exists. The blueprint is there. Every calculated move that dismantled your confidence, your relationships, and your perception of reality wasn't an accident. It was a methodical operation designed to strip you of your power piece by piece. You were chosen, and not by chance. This wasn't random, it wasn't a coincidence, and it sure as hell wasn't bad luck. It was deliberate, planned, engineered long before you even knew their names. You want to know why you were targeted? Because you carried something they couldn't replicate. A rare frequency, a spiritual resource they craved but couldn't create. Your energy filled the void in their hollow existence. You were their source of life force, an endless current of inspiration, warmth, and light they could never generate on their own. They didn't just stumble upon you. They studied you. They marked you. To them, you were a mine, something to extract from until there was nothing left but the shell of your former self. They weren't trying to connect. They were trying to consume. While you were out there living your life, assuming others moved through the world with the same basic decency you did, they were observing. Every story you told became ammunition. Every vulnerability you revealed turned into a pressure point. Every dream you shared became a map of your emotional architecture. They weren't listening to understand you, they were decoding you. Every detail you revealed helped them construct a psychological replica of you, one they could use to bypass your defenses and infiltrate your inner world. Think back to those early conversations, the ones that felt effortless, magnetic, almost fated. The way they mirrored your thoughts, finished your sentences, and seemed to understand your soul without you needing to explain. You thought it was connection, but it was reconnaissance. They were collecting data, learning your fears, your triggers, your desires. They built a profile so precise they could manipulate you from within, making you believe you'd finally found something genuine. You hadn't. You'd been studied, analyzed like a specimen under a microscope, unaware you were the experiment. And here's where the story turns darker. They weren't working alone. What you were up against wasn't a single manipulator, it was an entire network. People you thought were bystanders were quietly feeding information. Friends you confided in were double agents reporting on your emotional state. Strangers who appeared by coincidence at the perfect time were part of the web. Your life became a monitored ecosystem, every move logged, every word evaluated, every reaction measured. Remember those people who appeared out of nowhere when you were at your lowest point, the ones who seemed too perfectly timed, too compassionate, too helpful? They weren't accidents. They were inserted. Their purpose was to gather intelligence, influence your choices, and maintain control. And while you were trying to heal, they were tightening the net. Every moment you doubted yourself was a victory for them. But every time you trusted your intuition, that quiet voice that whispered something wasn't right, you were getting closer to the truth. You were never crazy. You were awakening. Those encounters weren't accidents. They were orchestrated placements. Every person who entered your life during that period had a purpose. They were strategically positioned to extract information, shape your decisions, and guide you toward outcomes that had already been designed long before you were aware of the game being played. Every new friend was screened, approved, and introduced under false pretenses. Every event, every meeting, every seemingly innocent social moment was engineered to serve their larger agenda. You weren't living through coincidences. You were living inside a controlled experiment. They didn't want authenticity. They wanted data, emotional, psychological, spiritual. They wanted to know how far they could push before you broke. So they created scenarios to test your limits. Conflicts that felt spontaneous but were rehearsed. Disagreements that seemed personal but were manufactured. Crises that emerged just when you were beginning to regain balance. These weren't organic struggles. They were emotional ambushes designed to drain your energy and make you too weary to question the truth. They studied your trauma responses like scientists analyzing a specimen, timing their manipulations for when you were most vulnerable, exhausted, doubtful, or isolated. You remember the subtle shifts, the group chats you weren't added to, the conversations that stopped the moment you entered the room, the sudden tension you couldn't explain but could feel. That was coordination. They were comparing notes, sharing updates on your reactions, adjusting tactics in real time. You were living in a controlled ecosystem, unaware that nearly every interaction was compromised. Your life had become a stage, and everyone around you was playing a role in a script you didn't know existed. The isolation didn't happen all at once. It crept in slowly, so gradually that by the time you noticed, the damage was already done. One by one, the people who truly cared about you began to fade away. This wasn't natural drift. It was engineered separation, a calculated dismantling of your support network. They removed anyone who might have grounded you, one person at a time, until you stood alone with no one left to validate your reality, except the ones controlling it. They didn't destroy your relationships directly. They corroded them from the inside. They whispered half-truths, planted doubts, twisted narratives with surgical precision. They manipulated perception, turning allies into skeptics and friends into quiet observers. The people who once protected you became unwitting instruments of your isolation. While you were defending yourself against accusations you didn't understand, they were already rewriting the story, portraying you as the unstable one, the difficult one, the problem everyone needed distance from. They didn't attack you openly. They built a reputation around you, a quiet, poisonous narrative whispered in private conversations. By the time you realized you were being portrayed as unstable, the verdict had already been reached. Friends stopped calling. Family grew cautious. Co-workers avoided eye contact. And through it all, they maintained perfect deniability. They never said anything outright, they only planted seeds and let others' imaginations water them. That was the genius of their isolation protocol. They made it look like you were the one doing it. They engineered situations where you had to choose between compromising your integrity or keeping people in your life. And when you chose your values, they framed it as dysfunction. They made your boundaries look like hostility. Your silence look like arrogance, and your solitude look like self-sabotage. It wasn't you pushing people away. It was them constructing a reality where everyone believed you did. They designed situations where no matter what you did, you'd lose. Every reaction, every word, every silence was turned against you. If you defended yourself, you were aggressive. If you stayed quiet, you were guilty. If you walked away, you were unstable. They built traps that ensured any response you gave would be used as evidence that you were the problem all along. It wasn't random, it was strategic. They wanted you to internalize the blame so deeply that even your pain became proof of your supposed dysfunction. But their most sophisticated weapon wasn't the manipulation itself. It was what they did to your perception. That was their masterpiece, their crown jewel in psychological warfare. They didn't just deceive you, they reconstructed your reality from the ground up. They inverted truth and illusion until you could no longer trust your own senses. Up became down, right became wrong, and every genuine experience you had was reframed to serve their narrative. They rewrote history as it was happening, erasing evidence, twisting context, and making you doubt what you saw, heard, and felt. You weren't confused by accident. You were programmed to be. Remember those moments when you confronted them about something hurtful they'd said or done? The way they stared back blankly, insisting it never happened. The way they called you crazy, paranoid, or emotionally unstable for even bringing it up. That wasn't forgetfulness, that was psychological erasure. It was a calculated method to destabilize your memory, to make you distrust your own mind. Every time they denied your reality, they were pulling another thread from your internal compass until you couldn't tell north from south anymore. They'd wound you, then act bewildered when you bled. They'd provoke you, then pretend to be the calm, rational one. They'd promise something and later swear you misunderstood. They'd start chaos, then accuse you of being too dramatic. Every interaction became a shifting labyrinth, walls moving, floors tilting, exits vanishing. You could never find your footing because that was the point. They wanted you exhausted, second-guessing yourself, and eventually dependent on them to define what was true. And then came the moment you started keeping receipts. The screenshots, the messages, the recordings. You weren't being paranoid. You were trying to survive. You were collecting evidence not to win an argument, but to confirm to yourself that your reality still existed. Because normal relationships don't require proof. Normal people don't make you question your own sanity. What they were doing was not normal. It was deliberate psychological conditioning. By the time you saw the pattern, they had already rewritten your story for everyone else. They'd convinced others that you were the unstable one, the liar, the manipulator. So when you finally produced your evidence, it only served their narrative. See? Look how paranoid they are. That's how effective their system was. They made the truth look like madness. Once you were isolated, uncertain, and doubting even your own memories, that's when the real extraction began. That's when they moved in to drain what was left. Your confidence, your peace, your light. You weren't broken. You were dismantled piece by design. Now you need to grasp exactly what they were truly after. It wasn't just your time, your energy, or your resources, though they drained every one of those. What they wanted was far more sacred, something irreplaceable. They were after your essence, your light, your frequency, that rare vibration that made you unmistakably you. It was your inner fire that intimidated them, because they could mimic your words, your style, even your mannerisms, but they could never recreate your spirit. So they had only two options: possess it or destroy it. They fed on your emotions like predators disguised as companions. Every time they triggered your fear, your frustration, your sadness, they grew stronger. Your pain was their power supply. Your confusion gave them cover. And your compassion, the part of you that kept trying to understand and heal them, was their playground. They manufactured crisis after crisis just to watch you scramble to fix what they'd broken, feeding off the energy you poured into restoring balance. They weaponized your empathy against you, turning your best qualities into their feeding mechanism. Every gift you brought to the table was either stolen or minimized. When you created something brilliant, they claimed it as their idea. When you achieved something remarkable, they called it luck. They studied you meticulously, your creativity, your logic, your intuition, then plagiarized your essence, presenting your insights as their own while convincing you that you had nothing special to offer. They didn't just want to take what you had, they wanted to rewrite reality so that you'd believe you never had it in the first place. That exhaustion you carried wasn't just emotional, it was energetic depletion. They were siphoning your life force like an invisible leech. They kept you in a cycle of chaos and calm, deliberately destabilizing your emotions so you'd stay reactive and open. Because when you're unbalanced, you're easy to drain. They knew exactly when to provoke you, when to feign care, when to disappear, and when to reappear. Each move designed to keep your energy field cracked open. And every time you tried to rest, every time you began to recharge, they staged another crisis to pull you right back into the drain. But it wasn't enough for them to feed on you in private. You were too powerful, too radiant. Your presence threatened the illusion they'd built, so they needed to discredit you publicly. That's when the smear campaign began, quietly and methodically. While you were still trying to repair things, still believing their lies about wanting peace, still protecting their image out of loyalty, they were already destroying yours. They played the long game, 10 steps ahead, painting you as the aggressor, the unstable one, the villain in a script they'd written months earlier. They crafted a narrative where they were the saint who tried everything to help you, while you were the ungrateful, erratic one. They cherry-picked screenshots and messages to strip away context, edited conversations to make you look unhinged, and retold stories with just enough truth to make their lies believable. They provoked your reactions, then showcased those reactions as proof of your instability. It was a psychological setup so refined that by the time you realized what was happening, the public verdict was already sealed. And then came the flying monkeys, the recruits who helped enforce their narrative. These weren't random people turning against you, they were strategically chosen operatives. They targeted the ones easily swayed by gossip, the ones who already envied you, the ones who lived for drama. They spoon-fed them selective truths that confirmed their biases and weaponized their curiosity into complicity. The sudden shift in how people treated you, the whispers, the side eyes, the distance, none of it was coincidence. It was all orchestrated. A social assassination carried out by proxy, designed to isolate you completely while keeping their own hands clean. They didn't just attack your reputation, they attempted to rewrite your identity. But what they could never erase was the truth that terrified them from the start. You carried a light they could never steal, only orbit. They built an army of proxies to keep the abuse alive long after they'd stepped out of view, ensuring that the attacks appeared organic, as if everyone around you had independently reached the same damning conclusions. Every time you tried to defend yourself, you walked right into their trap. They'd already programmed everyone to interpret your defense as aggression, your honesty as deceit, your evidence as manipulation. The framework was airtight. Silence meant guilt, speaking up meant instability. Every possible move confirmed the lie they'd planted. You were cornered in a psychological and social chokehold, an unwinnable game designed to force you into withdrawal. And that withdrawal? That was their victory condition. Every time you began to rise, they sensed it. Every time your clarity returned, they intervened. Just when your spirit started to stabilize, something, or someone, would appear to drag you back under. A message out of nowhere. An accidental encounter. A mutual friend just checking in. None of it was spontaneous. It was surveillance disguised as coincidence. They monitored your emotional state like scientists observing a test subject, noting your patterns, tracking your healing, watching for signs of recovery. And every time you got close to peace, they struck, because your healing was the one thing they couldn't allow. The moment you stopped seeing yourself as the problem, their entire narrative collapsed. Those random messages that popped up when you were finally feeling calm, those well-timed updates about them from mutual acquaintances, those sudden reminders of their existence. They weren't random at all. They were triggers, precisely timed to reopen wounds that were closing. Subtle psychological hooks meant to keep you within their energetic reach. Even from a distance, they wanted you to feel watched. They wanted you to remember that they still had access, that you were never completely free, and they knew exactly how to weaponize your empathy. The moment you began detaching, they'd send out distress signals, posts hinting at pain, apologies that felt sincere, whispers to mutual friends about how much they missed you. They knew you were conditioned to care, and they exploited that reflex every time. They crafted sob stories that painted them as the broken one, knowing it would pull at your compassion, knowing you might reach out to fix what they never intended to heal. They wanted to keep you engaged, not out of love, but out of control. Those sudden apologies, Those "I've changed" messages that appeared months later. That wasn't transformation, it was strategy. They'd studied recovery material, mimicked the language of accountability, and learned how to fake growth convincingly enough to plant doubt in your mind. They'd say all the right things, acknowledge their faults, express regret, promise change, without ever doing the internal work. It was performance, not progress. Redemption as theater. And just when you began to hope they'd evolved, they reverted, leaving you trapped in yet another cycle of hope and disappointment. Here's the part most people never see coming, and it's what makes this entire system so insidious. You kept trying to interpret their actions through the lens of normal human motivation. You looked for empathy, remorse, logic, even pain, but that's where you miscalculated. They weren't operating from emotional wounds. They were executing from strategic objectives. You weren't dealing with someone seeking connection. You were dealing with someone running an operation. You were targeted for reasons that had nothing to do with personal chemistry or misunderstanding. You represented something they wanted to neutralize, extract, or exploit. It wasn't about who you were as a person. It was about what you symbolized. Your light, your potential, your influence, your resonance. You were a variable in their larger agenda, and dismantling you was never personal. It was tactical. Maybe it was your influence they wanted to steal, your ability to inspire others effortlessly, to command attention without even trying, to make people feel something real in a world built on performance. Maybe it was your network, the connections you nurtured through authenticity, loyalty, and respect. Resources they could never earn on their own. Maybe it was your ideas, your vision, or your capacity to create beauty from chaos. Or maybe it was something even deeper, your light, your essence, that rare inner frequency that made you unbreakable in ways they could never comprehend. Your energy illuminated their shadows, and that exposure terrified them. Because when someone built entirely on illusion stands next to truth, the mask cracks. So, instead of evolving, they decided to destroy the mirror that reflected their emptiness. You possessed something that destabilized their entire construct. Your existence alone threatened their carefully curated image, their control, their narrative. They couldn't copy it, couldn't buy it, couldn't fake it. So they did what parasites do when faced with light. They attached themselves and began to feed. They wanted what you had, but they didn't want to earn it. They didn't want to grow into it. They wanted to extract it directly from your soul. You were competition that needed to be eliminated, a threat to their hierarchy, a resource to be captured, controlled, and eventually discarded once your energy was depleted. What you believed was connection was, in truth, infiltration. The relationship, whether romantic, platonic, professional, or familial, was never based on mutual respect or love. It was a transaction disguised as intimacy. Their affection wasn't emotional, it was strategic. Their charm wasn't spontaneous, it was scripted. Their empathy wasn't real, it was mimicry. Every word, every gesture, every touch was a performance calibrated to trigger a specific response from you. While you were falling in love, they were collecting intelligence. While you were opening up, they were assessing weaknesses. While you were trusting them, they were running simulations in real time, testing boundaries, measuring your reactions, identifying the most efficient ways to control you. Every vulnerable share became ammunition. Every emotional confession became leverage. Every act of forgiveness became a data point. You thought you were building a bond. They were building a profile. You thought you were healing together. They were mapping your emotional terrain so they could weaponize it later. And when the time came, when they had extracted every ounce of value, your attention, your love, your energy, your ideas, they followed the plan they'd prepared from the very start. The discard wasn't an accident. It was execution. The cruelty that felt so sudden wasn't a change of heart. It was part of the timeline. They had an exit strategy before they even entered your life. Every phase of the relationship was pre-designed. Idealization, devaluation, discard. You were never a partner, a friend, or a lover to them. You were an acquisition, a means to an end, a mission to be completed. Once the extraction was done, they didn't just leave, they detonated. They left emotional wreckage so severe that your own mind turned into a battlefield. They made sure that even in their absence, their presence lived on through confusion, guilt, and shame. You were never meant to move on easily. They engineered it that way. And the worst part isn't what they stole, it's what they installed. They left invisible wounds that no one else could see, psychological scars that rewired the way you experience the world. They didn't just break your heart, they rewrote the code of your nervous system. They made you associate love with fear, calm with danger, and attention with manipulation. They trained your body to flinch at kindness and brace for betrayal. You started mistaking peace for boredom, stability for suspicion, and emotional safety for a setup. They didn't just manipulate your mind, they reconditioned your entire being. Now you catch yourself apologizing for existing, explaining your needs like you're burdening someone, defending your boundaries like you're starting a war. You overthink simple interactions, replay conversations in your head, and question whether your emotional responses are valid or exaggerated. That's not you being weak. That's programming. It's their echo, still running loops in your mind. You become hyper-aware, cautious, self-editing in ways you never used to be, afraid of being misunderstood, afraid of being too much, too sensitive, too intense. They built that fear intentionally, so you'd continue policing yourself long after they were gone. They made you your own warden. The internal critic that once sounded like them now speaks in your voice. You enforce their rules, anticipate their reactions, and punish yourself before anyone else can. They don't have to haunt you directly. They live rent-free in your reflexes. Every time you silence your truth to avoid conflict, they win. Every time you shrink yourself to make others comfortable, their conditioning succeeds. You're not just carrying trauma, you're carrying their programming, a mental virus designed to perpetuate their control through you. But here's the truth they never wanted you to realize. You can rewrite that code. The same sensitivity they exploited is your superpower. The same empathy they twisted is your strength. The same heart they tried to corrupt is your proof that you were never like them. They needed to manipulate to feel powerful. You only need to be authentic. And once you see the pattern for what it is, a system of control, you stop being the program and start becoming the programmer. You stop reacting and start remembering who you were before they tried to rewrite your soul. That's where their power ends, when you decide to stop carrying their ghost and start reclaiming your own light. The hypervigilance you developed, the constant tension in your shoulders, the way your eyes subconsciously scan every room, the inability to ever truly rest even in quiet moments, didn't come from nowhere. That isn't paranoia. That's what happens when your body spends years in a state of psychological combat. It's not a flaw in your system, it's the system adapting to survive the impossible. Your body learned that danger wasn't loud and obvious. It was subtle, emotional, unpredictable, disguised as love, concern, or care. So it rewired itself to detect the slightest shift in tone, the smallest change in facial expression, the quietest sign of tension in the air. You became fluent in reading atmospheres because your survival depended on it. You learned that safety could turn to chaos in an instant, that people could weaponize affection, that comfort could be bait, and that apologies didn't always mean peace. So your nervous system stayed in permanent alert mode, always scanning, always calculating, always waiting for the next ambush. This wasn't overreaction, it was strategy. It was your body learning that to let your guard down was to risk devastation. It was the mind's version of sleeping with one eye open. These patterns, what therapists might call hypervigilance, anxiety, or overanalysis, aren't signs of fragility. They're proof of your resilience. They're the reason you're still standing. But what kept you alive in the battlefield now keeps you trapped in its ruins. You can't turn the alarm off, even though the war is over. That's the cruel irony of trauma. Survival habits become prisons. Your body still thinks the danger is here. It's still fighting ghosts. Recovery isn't just about healing wounds, it's about deprogramming. It's about identifying which reactions were born from survival and deciding which ones deserve to stay. It's about recognizing that the voice in your head telling you you're too needy, too emotional, too intense, that voice isn't you. It's them. It's the internalized echo of their control, still running the same script long after they've disappeared from your life. That voice was trained to keep you small, to make you self-police, to make you do their work for them, even in their absence. And that's the brilliance and cruelty of psychological warfare. It teaches the victim to self-destruct on autopilot. Once you start seeing how deep that programming runs, the entire landscape of your past changes. You begin to notice the mechanisms, the manipulative cycles that felt so personal, so tailored, so unique to your story. But in reality, they were part of a blueprint. You see the patterns repeating across different people, different relationships, even different cultures. It's almost mechanical. The same stages, the same phrases, the same emotional choreography. You start to understand that what felt like destiny was actually design. The love bombing, the intense euphoric connection that made you feel seen and understood on a soul level, wasn't love. It was recruitment. It was a conditioning phase designed to hook you quickly and deeply before your intuition could sound the alarm. The devaluation that followed, the slow erosion of your self-worth, the subtle criticism wrapped in concern, the shifting goalposts of what made you good enough. That wasn't about you changing. It was about control tightening. The discard, the sudden abandonment, the shocking emotional coldness, the rewriting of history wasn't random cruelty. It was the inevitable conclusion of a cycle they've perfected. You were never the exception. You were the next subject. Realizing this doesn't make your pain smaller. It makes it make sense. It reveals the truth that this was never about you being flawed or broken. You were simply cast in a role they've rehearsed 100 times. You were the newest mirror, the next battery, the latest source of energy. The playbook never changes, only the actors do. And now that you've seen the script, you can't unsee it. You start noticing the same manipulation tactics in others. The quick attachment, the mirroring of your values, the subtle testing of your boundaries disguised as just joking. You start seeing how they interview their next victim the same way they once interviewed you. You realize how they identified your wounds, how they learned your triggers, how they mapped your insecurities and then shaped themselves into the illusion of your ideal person. They didn't love you, they studied you. They became everything you ever wanted, only to use that version of themselves to dismantle you from the inside. They positioned themselves as the healer for your old wounds, and then they became the deepest wound you've ever known. That's the genius of their cruelty. It's personalized destruction. But here's where everything shifts. The moment you gain awareness of this system, you become what they fear most: unpredictable, immune, awake. Knowledge strips them of power. You start to see the mask before it forms, to feel the manipulation before it lands, to sense the energy shift before the words even come. You become your own defense mechanism. You stop being prey and start being pattern recognition in human form. You evolve from survivor to sentinel, from wounded to watchtower. You can now see what most people can't: the covert tactics, the emotional hooks, the behavioral mimicry. You begin to help others see it too. You become a living warning system, someone who can name the danger while it's still pretending to be safe. And that's why they hate survivors. That's why they discredit, mock, and silence people who tell the truth. Because when survivors talk, illusions collapse. When you pull back the curtain, the entire performance fails. That's all for today. Dear Father, I pray for the growth of my faith. Help me trust you even when physical evidence is lacking. Let me believe in your perpetual presence, knowing you will never harm me. I understand that your thoughts for me are thoughts of prosperity and not harm, to give me a good future. Thank you, gracious and eternal Father, for always listening to my voice. I offer up this prayer to you in the name of Jesus. Amen. Thank you, Jesus, for your love and provision. I am grateful for your presence in my life and the abundance you bring. If this video resonated with you, please like, subscribe to the channel, and share it with those who need to hear this message. Leave a comment below about your journey and how you are preparing for your own triumphant return. If you'd like to support our work, please consider contributing through Buy Me a Coffee. This helps us continually improve our content to offer you the best. The link to Buy Me a Coffee is in the description. No gift is too small. Whether it's a penny, a prayer, or a share, your generosity helps spread God's word and brings hope to others. Don't stop here. Watch our next video for powerful revelations about the signs that reveal you are the chosen one. We've enjoyed following this spiritual journey with you. Thank you for staying with us until the end. Keep shining brightly and embrace your destiny with courage. See you next time. Blessings to all the beautiful souls from the Enlighten wisdom.